Welcome back to Detention to Details. This is episode 4. We're with Neil Glines from Elite Detailing and Ceramic Coatings in Redlands, California. And Neil has a really great story, and I think you guys are really going to get something from this. So, welcome, Neil.
Thank you for having me, brother.
Thank you for coming, man.
Appreciate it. Absolutely, my pleasure.
We've been friends for quite some time now.
now.
Sorry, I do have Penny, so if I'm like reaching around and just trying to figure her out. Sorry. Yeah, we've been friends for quite some time, and we've been through some stuff together, huh?
We have indeed.
Yeah, so let's just get started on quick how we met. You know, it was through detailing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was a Facebook thing.
Yeah.
And we just started commenting, and I think the first time I met you in person was at SEMA, and you came up and you said, "Hey, man, I'm Justin." And that was probably 8 years ago.
Yeah, that was at Rennie's party, right?
I believe so.
I think that was at Rennie's
party.
party.
We had a lot in common, and we just kind of hit it off from there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could feel a strong aura coming from you from the day I met you, man, and it made me want to be around you and want to get to know you, and I'm really glad that I followed that.
Thank you, as am I.
So, all right, well, we met at SEMA, and been following each other for a couple years, and we haven't ever really delved into your story.
No.
You know, and I see what you've done, and I see your success, and I see the struggles that you've been through, and I think that you have a lot to offer people when it comes to overcoming adversity.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to kind of focus on this talk, just how we both have overcome adversity, because we've had a lot thrown at us.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. Life can be challenging.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up, and what your family's like. And
yeah, so we started out in Newbury Park, out by Thousand Oaks. At the age of 10, moved up to the mountains up Lake Arrowhead, Twin Peaks area. My parents, myself and my brother, who's 4 years younger. And we were up there for probably 3-4 years. About the age of 14 or so, we moved down to Redlands and was there ever since. So my parents got divorced when I was 17. Dad moved out of state. So a little bit, not as involved in my life as he had been, obviously.
yeah.
And then, due to that divorce, I actually moved out on my own when I was 17.
Wow.
So I was going to school at Cal State San Bernardino, and that's actually when I started detailing.
Yeah.
Because I was on my own and started doing it on weekends to help pay the rent.
Yeah.
Working at a gas station during the week, clean cars on the weekends while I went to school.
Dope.
Yeah.
So what did you go to school for?
I got a degree in business.
Oh, cool.
Which it turned out, by the time I graduated, I was making more doing detailing than I was going to work for somebody.
Right.
And as you're well aware, once you start down that path of business ownership, it becomes terribly difficult going to work for somebody. Although I did do that as well. I worked for Merrill Lynch at one point, and did some other entrepreneurial things. I've always owned different businesses, and I always figured, for better or worse, I'd either do half decent or fall on my face, and I've done a little bit of both.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that goes without saying. I mean, I don't know any, like I said in a previous conversation, I don't know any successful people that haven't had failures. Like,
no, you
don't. But you don't see the failures. You see the win.
Yeah,
you don't see
it's the failures that get you to the win. And I would say, if you can get through this without getting kicked in the teeth a couple times, you're very blessed. Most of us get kicked in the teeth.
Yeah.
At least once.
Oh yeah, I mean, a girl breaks up with you, breaks your heart.
Yeah.
You lose a business. You go through a custody battle. There's many. Lose a parent.
Challenges everywhere.
Lose a child.
Yeah.
Go through, issues with your children that you wish there are things that you could
never see coming.
Keep that you don't see it coming, and you wish you could save them from it, but they're gonna do their thing anyways.
Tough get down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went to school, and then where'd you kind of go astray, do you think?
So, I always pushed myself very hard. I had a lot of expectations for myself, and I achieved a decent amount early on. Bought my first house when I was 26.
Wow.
At one point I had the detailing business. I had a sticker manufacturing business for RVs. I had a limousine business, decent size, 10, 12 cars, 20 employees. And went through a divorce that was terribly difficult. And that was kind of the beginning of trying to hold on to things. And about 2005, 6, I lost everything. Lost the sticker business. I had to sell that to pay off the divorce. The limousine business went under. Still had the detailing business, but we'd had to move locations. That wasn't doing well. And that's when I started to go sideways. I had been taking Norcos recreationally, and then I got into a car accident where I actually needed them.
Right.
And at that point, I started abusing them, which, as we're well aware, when things aren't going well and you start down that path, it goes even worse.
Yeah, it just starts spiraling.
It just starts
control.
spiraling. Yeah. But that was kind of a way to numb myself on what was happening.
I can only imagine.
It was an easy way to check out, and obviously makes it infinitely worse.
And how old was Hunter at the time?
Hunter at that time, so that was about 2006. He was born in 98, so he was 8 years old.
Okay.
He was 8. And so...
so he remembers...
He remembers all of it. Yeah. So he started seeing things that a kid should never see. Dad in handcuffs, that kind of thing. So that was a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Enzo's seen me in handcuffs, but I don't think hopefully he never will, and hopefully he doesn't remember it.
Yeah, it's, I look back at that time and just the lifestyle and everything that it entailed. And, those were, my addiction period was about 6 or 7 years. And those are pretty formative years for a kid,
Yeah.
So he was 8 to about 14, give or take, 13, 14, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And, the house getting raided, coming home, dad's in handcuffs again, or dad's going to jail, and, it got to be, how long this time, Dad?
Yeah.
And that's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, especially when you're waiting on a judge to tell you how long.
Yeah, you don't know. That's still, to this day, is one of the more painful experiences of my life, is my child visiting me in jail.
Yeah.
I never cried in jail until my kid came and saw me when he left. That was the hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Our boys are like our worlds, right?
That's it.
They,
yeah. And you want to do everything for them and be the best dad and man you can be for them.
You lay down your life for them. Take any
sickness
sickness or pain or injury from them that you could. And
that was a time where I chose myself over that, and that was a huge part of my recovery, was getting past that guilt. That was the biggest hang up I had in my recovery, was getting past that guilt. It affected me for years after I got clean.
Well, as we know, I mean, getting clean and moving on and becoming the man that we want to be, we have to forgive ourselves as hard as it is. And even though we say we forgive ourselves, we wake up some mornings and look at ourselves in the morning. And
I beat myself up for a number of years over that.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Well, who reached out? How did you stop that spiral? Because
so I'd been in and out of jail several times, and I never committed any crimes except against myself. I never robbed houses. I never held people up or burglarized cars. My crimes were against myself in terms of possession or trying to forge a prescription. Those types of things.
Yeah.
And I finally had caught a felony charge on forging a prescription, and so I ended up on felony probation. And I was still trying to do cars when I could, trying to generate a little bit of money, and I had done a vehicle, and of course at that point, I had no car, I'd lost everything, and I had done this vehicle, and I was walking back to my house, and the officer that had arrested me for the forged prescription saw me walking down the street, and as you may be aware, when you're on parole or probation, they don't need probable cause.
Oh, wow.
And so he rolled up on me and told me to keep my hands where he could see them, and put my hands on the car, and he searched me. And I asked what I did. He said, "You didn't do anything. You're on probation." And he searched me, and I had drugs on me. And that became a felony probation violation, which would have been my second or third. And so at that point, I ended up in jail, and I was facing prison time. and I had to make a decision on what I was going to do. I had heard about drug court, and I had decided that was the direction I was going to go. I still remember when the officer arrested me. At that time, I smoked cigarettes, and he let me go out back of the police station. Of course, he handcuffed me to the railing, but he let me have one last cigarette.
Wow.
So it was going to be a minute.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling me, you know what, maybe you'll look back and this will be a good thing for you. And all I could think about at the time was I was going to be going through horrible withdrawals in jail from the opiates, But he was right, and I was able to get out and go into drug court, which is a very intensive 16-month program where you're doing multiple meetings a week, multiple drug tests a week, AA meetings, NA meetings. And if you falter on any of that, you go back to jail.
Yeah, and you have to be at court in front of a judge every week.
Every week.
Yeah.
And so it was challenging. As I said, I didn't have a car. And so I'd never taken a city bus before. I got to know those things real well.
Wow.
But that, they put me in drug court out of the city I lived in, so outside of Redlands. And because they didn't want you within the same locale that you had been operating, so to speak.
Jeez.
And so, a 20-minute trip down there for a drug test, which was random, you found out every morning whether you were or you were not,
right,
became a 2-hour round trip. So they kept you very busy on purpose.
Of course.
And I had told the probation officer, I said, I'm going to go through this thing as fast as possible. And he goes, yeah, I keep hearing that. And I did. I had made that decision that I didn't want that to be my legacy, and it was 16 months. I got through it as fast as you could. There was no setbacks. I didn't miss any drug tests, no positive drug tests. I didn't miss any meetings. I went through it as fast as you could. As a matter of fact, my drug court counselor, I graduated in drug court in April of 13. He still comes by my shop and says hello.
That's awesome.
He still calls me randomly.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal, because he kind of guided me through a very turbulent, difficult time.
Yeah, I'm friends with my drug court.
It's awesome.
PO on Facebook.
It was really neat. When he came by my shop for the first time, which is probably 5 years after I graduated drug court, I was super happy to see him, of course. And he gives me this big hug and he tears up. He goes, "You're the reason I do what I do." Ah, man, that's awesome. So that's how I kind of got back to ground zero. I was below ground zero.
Yeah.
And then, now it's rebuilding time.
Base camp.
Yeah, base camp. And man, at that point I'd lost my driver's license and had no car, no place to live, no money. You walk out of jail with the stuff that's in that Ziploc bag.
Oh, yeah.
Which wasn't much.
It's been sitting in that Ziploc bag the whole time.
Quite some time.
Not very fresh.
Wasn't much.
It's not like they wash it before they give it back to you.
No. So again, the drug court counselor got me to a sober living facility. And I did the only thing I knew to do, because at that point now I had a felony charge, which would be expunged when drug court was over. And so,
Nice.
But as far as applying for any jobs with a felony,
Yeah.
So I did the only thing I needed to do, which was start cleaning cars. Made it difficult to get to places to clean cars because I had no car, so I would carry my wash bucket on the bus.
Wow.
And go to the different locations and do cars. And very, very slowly I started getting my customers back. And, I had a guy that I had known that had a used car lot in Redlands, and I asked him if I could use part of his parking lot to do cars, and he knew me and knew what I was trying to do. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And he had a broom closet, and that was my office. Kept my bucket and some of my supplies in the broom closet, and I'd take the bus from Loma Linda to Redlands every morning and just start doing cars.
Wow.
So that was how I kind of started back doing what I was doing.
Was it called Elite Detailing?
It was.
Nice.
Yeah. I just picked it back up. It'd been closed down for the most part, for 6-7 years at that point. And I knew, I wasn't going to really regain, obviously, right off the bat, my retail customers. I hadn't really screwed anybody over, but,
It
took some time.
They've moved on, found somebody else where you're going.
So I ended up, I was able to get a shop. I got a loan from a friend, and got into a shop and started doing wholesale cars. We know how fun that is, but I had to have a way to pay the rent, and so I knew a buddy that did wholesaling, and I want to say it was $85, $90 a car.
It's consistent work.
It's consistent work, and he'd drop off 20 of these things.
There you go.
And so I would work. At one point, I worked 27, 28 days straight, 12-hour days, not making a whole lot. I mean, if you're doing your own get down on a complete detail,
but you start to develop a pattern and consistency.
And I just I put my AirPods in and my headphones or whatever, and I would just go to town. If I did 4 cars that day, 5 cars that day, at $85 a car, that's that much more than I had at the start of the day.
And you didn't have to travel.
No, and they, he'd drop them off to me. It was hard. Auction cars are no joke.
No. Because most of them repos, stuff like that.
Repos,
so they treat their car like they
some
treat
of those
their
cars
life.
they're horrible. You need a hazmat suit to get into those darn things.
Yep.
But that was what got me consistent revenue. Coming back until I was able to further develop the retail customers.
Something came to mind when we were talking all that. Like, as detailers, I mean, maybe this isn't 100% of the people, but I would venture to say that 70 to 90% of people, you can tell how they treat their life by how they treat their car.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I mean, I have 2 kids. My truck is still clean. And it's not because I own a detail shop. It's because I need my stuff to be clean. I need that order around me.
Right.
And it makes me feel better.
Right.
When I get into it. When I get in my truck after like a leg day or something like that, and there's like crumbs and sand and stuff everywhere, I'm just like, okay, I got to go straight to the shop and just knock this out real quick. Like, because I can't leave it sit there.
That's the OCD part of us as detailers that makes us good at what we do.
I think it's OCD, but it's also like wanting to feel good when I get in my vehicle.
Yeah.
Like it's a big part of our lives. We spend a lot of time in it, and you spend time in a filthy mess, then your life is gonna be a filthy mess.
Yeah.
You spend time in an orderly, neat, nice, clean thing, you're most likely gonna correspond that to the rest of your life.
So. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. I never knew that's how you got started in detailing, but and that's like before ceramic coatings and all that. But
that was before ceramics and everything.
But the good thing is just like me, you're able to build that clientele, before that boom hit, so that when it did hit, you were able, you actually had an audience to spill the beans to.
Correct.
It's not like you're just starting a detailing business and saying, oh, I detail cars. Oh, and we do this new ceramic coating too. It's better than wax. It's this.
Right.
Like, whoa, dude, slow down. Can you just show me that you know how to clean a car? And
And I was, obviously I was just getting back into it. I hadn't been paying attention to anything.
Yep.
When I reopened in November of 13, I want to say, and ceramics were probably on the scene at that point.
Yeah, they were still a couple years out.
They were still a couple years out. So I'd heard about them. But again, I was kind of playing catch up. And so. I didn't know much about them, and so I was trying to learn, and I don't think I've ever told you this. So, how shy I am. I had seen this guy online that had a really big place in San Diego, and just doing all these beautiful cars and ceramic coatings. It's called Elite Finish. His name is Wes Waltz.
Okay.
And I just randomly called him one day. I didn't know the guy. I say, hey, how you doing, man? I own this shop up here in Redlands. It happens to be called Elite as well. Can I come down and shadow you for the day? And he does trainings and stuff now, but at the time, he didn't do any of that. And he's like, I get, I'd probably have to charge you. I go, I would expect you to charge me. And so I drove down there, spent like 12 hours with him. Nice. And he kind of showed me what he did. And, I think he's Car Pro. And showed me, application processes and everything. And he's still a friend. We still talk. But that was kind of my introduction to ceramics and how to do it.
Bro, I did the same exact thing.
Yeah.
It's so funny. After we met at Rennie's party, I met Chris and Christian Parker, detail boss in Scottsdale, and I was like, okay, this is what I want. Like, their shop's freaking beautiful. They seem like they work together really well. And at the time, me and Hillary, had come on the scene, and we were working together, but I was like, that is what That is the epitome of what I think a detail shop should look like, should be like. And I reached out to them. I'm like, hey, man, can you train me? You know, and he's like, yeah, we would have to charge. I'm like, charge me what you want. Just let me know. And we went out there for 2 days, and I think we coded like 4 cars, like a Lamborghini, a Mustang GT, like some really, really nice cars. And, you know, I didn't ask much about the shop because I was taking that in, you know, because all that was an afterthought, you know. And what I was really focusing on is like, how do I get the knowledge? How do I extract the knowledge from these guys that I need to go and run a shop like this?
You know, I think it's very telling, you know, when you own a business or you're an entrepreneur, you find a way to learn, right? Yeah. I wanted to expand my knowledge, and we figured out how to do it. You called who you called, I called who I called. Yeah. You figure out a way to get where you want to go.
Bro, and before that and after that, I have always had a habit of taking on jobs that I wasn't necessarily qualified for.
Right, and that was, you know, that was actually the main reason I went down and saw Wes was I was always good at sales. I can sell things.
Yeah, sure.
But I wanted to make sure that my quality and what I was doing was backing up what I was selling.
Right.
And so we had a really nice classic award-winning Impala coming in, and I wanted to do right by the guy.
Yeah.
And I'd done a coating or two, but now I'm working on this $100,000 show car, and he trusted me, and I wanted to make sure that trust wasn't misplaced.
Yep.
And so I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
And that was how I did it. And Wes became kind of a mentor. That he goes, you ever get stuck? You know, you have problems, which is great because that Impala paint was really soft and it was scratching even with nice microfibers.
Oh,
and kind of
you look at it funny.
Yeah, you look at it funny, and you go to pre-coat it and it's scratching. I'm like, oh, you know.
What did you end up doing in that case?
Oh, you know what? We soaked it with pre-coat, used a 700 GSM, and just real lightly.
Wow.
You know, it wasn't the typical spray
Unreal.
And wipe it down. So honestly, you look at it the wrong way, and obviously you can polish the scratches out, but it was...
You can only polish so many times.
So, so it's just a super plush microfiber and a ton of pre-coat and just a real light wiping process, watching it real careful under those lights. You know?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember cars like that. Like, I mean, you know, when they switched from lacquer-based paint to water-based paint, it just fucked everything up, dude.
Yeah,
it was like
really did.
The paint got so soft, and there were defects everywhere, and
it makes it very challenging.
Yeah, and everything was caked with like filler, you know, and like the owners would bring us brand new 2017, 2018, 2019 cars. Like they don't need it doesn't need polish. It just needs the coating, and I'm like, okay, sure, all right, well, we'll see, right? And then we strip it,
right?
And next thing you know, you're like, oh wow. I had a Tesla come in, like a Model S Tesla. I think it was like the 100D before the Plaid, right? So it was the Plaid before the Plaid.
Right.
$100,000 car, stripped it, found like 61 defects on this thing. So I went around it because the dude insisted that it was fine.
Right.
Went around it and just put little pieces of blue tape all over everything. And I was like, took a picture of it, walked around. I was like, you should come in. You should come in and see this, you know, because I don't even believe it, what I'm looking at, right? I don't believe it. I don't know how
this is even possible.
Any car company could let this pass like this. So, yes, please, come in. I'm thinking we should just forget the paint correction. Let's just wrap the damn thing.
Yeah, and call it a day.
It's so fucked up.
Well, like Tesla says, they're not so much interested in paint quality. It's a technology-driven vehicle.
For sure. And dude, they only come in like 3 or 4 colors anyway. They're boring as shit. So just buy a black one and wrap it, right? Like that's...
Call it a day.
That's the best thing to do.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, I figured out how to keep a black car clean.
Right.
Wrap it a different color.
That's right.
Like,
definitely
the only way
bet.
you could keep a black car clean
Absolutely.
for any amount of time.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we went through some of the biggest challenges was Hunter, right? And the effects and long-term memories that he would have and you would have, right?
Yeah.
Because it's very imprinting, and especially at that age. So,
it is.
So, do you mind if we talk about him for a couple minutes?
Not at all.
All right. What kind of kid was he?
So he was a good kid, and even though I was in active addiction, I was a high functioning addict. You know, I didn't do things and pass out for 5 hours. You know, I still went to all the soccer games, and you know, he was a very happy-go-lucky kid. Played soccer.
Yeah.
You know,
He's a good kid.
He's a good kid. He's got a great heart. you know.
Well, the apple don't fall far from the tree.
Yeah, thank you. You know, but the challenges we've faced in these last few years, you know, some of that stuff comes back up, you know, and he tells me all the time he's proud of me, you know, and is appreciative of what I've done in terms of coming back from my addiction. But I still think there's some lingering issues there. Kind of has to be, you know. Like I said, he saw a lot of things that a kid that age, any age, shouldn't see, you know, and was exposed to, you know, a group of people, you know, because you surround yourself with people that are doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
When you get used to being around that crowd, it gets normal.
Yeah. And that's not good. It's not a good crowd, you know. So it was, you know, it was difficult because when I got clean, you know, children need discipline. And so he was probably 15 when I finally got, you know, I got out of the sober living. I got us an apartment. You know, I was just getting back on my feet. You know, I'd finally gotten a car. It's a really snazzy 2003 Buick, you know, but it got me where I needed to go, and it was better than taking the bus.
Amen.
You know, and, you know, he started in smoking pot, you know, this and that. And I had a hard time with the discipline aspect of it because I still felt guilty from the life I had led and the things he had seen. And so my discipline probably wasn't where it needed to be to keep him on the straight and narrow. Because the last thing you want is your child, to go down the path you did, right? But I wasn't in a good position to discipline correctly because I felt so guilty about what I put him through. So that kind of compounded the issue, you know, and he ended up having disciplinary problems, you know, finally ended up getting kicked out of school his senior year. And we were able to have him graduate, and I knew some people at the school, and I twisted a few arms, and he was able to walk, you know, for graduation, which was a blessing. Yeah. You know, and then, you know, as you're aware, he was in, you know, a car accident, suffered a brain injury, and that created a whole host of other problems. So,
what was that like for you?
Hell, most difficult thing I've ever gone through. His personality completely changes, and he does a 180, an absolute 180. It's almost hard to describe if you don't see it, you know. And so when that happened, you know, he got into drinking and drugs, which made it infinitely worse. Mm-hmm. And that lasted for a period of 6 months, 8 months. And then he was good for about a year. And then he hit his head again, and it reactivated it.
What part of the brain was the injury in?
Frontal lobe.
And what is that responsible for?
So it controls your emotions, your cognitive thinking. Mm. And so everything just goes out the window. Just goes out the window. And I've never really talked about this, honestly.
Yeah. And if at any point you need to take a break or not,
I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult, you know. And the second time, it was again another period of 6 to 8 months. And I really can't overemphasize it's daily chaos. It's daily conflict. It's just going out. He would randomly drive out of town and get stuck somewhere, and he's blowing my phone up. Mm-hmm. He's stuck, and he's aggressive, and you know. And so now you got the whole tough love thing. Do I help him? Do I not help him? He's not in his right mind. He's not thinking correctly.
You have to rescue him. You're his dad.
Yeah. So
that's what's going through your head, I'm sure.
So now it compounded by my earlier guilt. You know, now I'm dealing with this situation that's incredibly difficult. You know, and so that second time that he had hit his head was in October of 19, and that happened to coincide with Megan's illness, and so that then became the most difficult time of my life, dealing with her, fighting her battle, and him being absolutely sideways.
Yeah,
it was. I got it from both sides, and it was all I could do to hang on at that point.
Yeah.
So it was
I remember that time
tough.
very well.
It was tough. That was tough. Yeah. So and we can go back to that, but then he was good for a while, and actually for a period of about 2.5 years, and unfortunately in November of last year, he went sideways again. And he'd been doing so great. He'd moved in with me because
he was working with you. I remember he came to the party.
Yeah, he was working with me and came to the party. And
came to SEMA, represented your business.
He torn his ACL. He not at work. He gone across the way to check on his car and slipped and fell and tore his ACL. So he moved in with me while he recovered. And he was in school to be an electrician, and he powered through it. I take a little bit of time off, but finished it off and graduated and got a job almost immediately. And I was thinking, man, we're good, man.
Yeah.
It's been 2.5 years now, and I had some people over at my house. We did a little bit of drinking, and unknown to me, excessive alcohol intake can cause your brain to swell. And we had fun that night, and it was only a couple days later. He said a couple things that sounded off to me, and went completely sideways again. And within a month, I'd lost everything. Car was impounded, got fired, and was aggressive and verbally confrontational.
And this is like dealing with someone that you don't even know
It's
anymore.
a different person altogether. And so I was kind of thinking, well, because he's living with me, I can maybe control this a little bit better. And it was anything but. And there was physical confrontations, and ultimately, I'm really revealing a lot of stuff here.
That's all right.
Ultimately, I ended up filing restraining. I ended up filing a restraining order against him to get out of my house because he was selling drugs out of my house. And have people over my house, and I was living out of the area. I was back a day and a half a week.
Yeah, no, you were living at the beach and
enjoying
enjoying your life.
And trying to enjoy my life. And I'd come back, and the house was a disaster, and there's people in my house, and things are starting to disappear out of my house, and that's not my kid. He would never do that. He was always so respectful, and so now I'm really stuck, and I kicked him out, but I let him stay in the garage, but then he's selling drugs out of the garage, and so ultimately I had to file a restraining order, and he ended up finally getting arrested for drug possession. And I thought, okay, well, I knew if I could get him clean for a couple weeks, his brain would recover. And he wasn't in jail long enough for that to happen. And he got out, went right back to it. And finally, when he had no other options, I filed the restraining order. He had nowhere to go. He went into a kind of a hybrid sober living recovery home.
Yeah.
He was there for about a week, but he's still starting to act a little bit better, but not entirely. So he got kicked out of there. And again, here you are, do you help your kid? Do you not help your kid? He's got no place to stay, but he was the one that got kicked out, and he was on the streets for a couple days.
Still got to go save our boys.
Yeah, and so he actually ended up, getting a job selling solar, which provided housing of all things.
Oh, nice.
And that's tough. Get down, high level of rejection, a lot of walking.
Oh yeah. And solar's like on its way out with all the tax incentives and all
tough.
that. And
But now that personality is starting to come back. Now I'm seeing my kid again, and that was middle of November. It's about 5 months. And it was.
I know it was really hard for you.
Oh man, I mean the day he got arrested, he left my house after a pretty bad argument. And the police had shown up, and they pulled him over at the end of the street. And he had taken to carrying this BB gun that looked real. And it occurred to me that he had that on him. And he was refusing to get out of the car, and I could hear them giving commands at the end of the street to exit the vehicle. And now they had all drawn down. I was in tears. I was thinking, I'm going to hear gunshots. That's it, So it was stuff like that was incredibly difficult. So now we've got some legal issues to deal with. Nothing terribly bad, but things need to be dealt with. He's currently in Wyoming. He's got an electrical job out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say at least he can go back
He's
to
doing
that.
phenomenal. And at this point, I'm just thankful for the peace.
Yeah.
You know, it was such chaos. I mean, it's really indescribable.
I can.
You know, it's horrible. You know, do you send your kid $10 to get something to eat, or do you not? Is he going to use the $10 to get something to eat? And that was the 13th phone call today. Do you block the number, but he calls from other numbers? And I'm answering the business phone, so I got to answer the phone. And,
Total addict behavior.
oh, it was terrible. You know, and so, you know, now, you know, he's back on point. You know, and I can't help but think, I don't know what God protected him from. What could have happened that didn't? How many times did he drive drunk? How many times did he pull that BB gun, look like a real gun, and someone else could have had a real gun? You know, he was very confrontational. You know, how many times did he get away without someone stabbing him?
So not like him.
No, it's the complete opposite of him. You know, so I lived almost in fear that I was going to get that call every day, because I knew what lifestyle he was living. Out all night, sleeping all day, and you know what happens late at night. Nothing good happens.
Yeah.
You know, especially when you're out at clubs.
That's why I'm asleep.
Yeah, nothing good happens after 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Do you think he understands now that the seriousness of using alcohol or drugs with his
He
brain
does.
injury?
He does. Yeah.
I hope he does.
I hope so. You know, he understands what happened.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I feel like that parent, he's really a good boy. You know, but he really is.
Dude,
he's a great young man, and you know, I just talked to him today. You know, and he's working this job, and you know, it's beautiful out there, and he's eating correctly, and he's working out and going for hikes, and you know, it's like that's what it's supposed to be like.
But it's like that movie World War Z, like with the zombies. It's like as soon as they get bit, like 10 seconds later, they're not who they were any longer. You know.
So now
we
we need to figure out how to hold and make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Because going forward, you know, a productive life, you could lose it all in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't have that. You can't be putting time into a job, or if, you know, you got a girlfriend or get married or whatever the case might be, and then that happens, you're going to lose it all.
Yeah.
And you know, you can lose it all in a month, and it takes a whole hell of a lot longer than a month to recover, as we know.
Right.
You know, it's a hell of a hole to dig out of. You know, it's like when I was clawing my way back, like we say, the addiction didn't take place overnight.
Yeah.
It's not going to be rectified overnight.
So, in your addiction, I mean, obviously, you know, you and I have had a beer together, like, you know, had drinks together, partied, whatever.
Right.
How do you find that balance to be able to know in your own conscious that, okay, like, this is not going to set me back on?
Right.
How do you contain that?
So for me, you know, my problem was opiates, and I had told myself I would never take another opiate, no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, at one point I had like 4 wisdom teeth pulled, and he started to write a prescription, and I shook my head no. My mouth was full of gauze. He goes, "Do you know what kind of pain you're going to be in?" And I said, "Will it kill me?" And he said, "No." I said, "Then no opiates." Yeah. You know, so alcohol for me, I mean, I've certainly had my fair share of hangovers, don't get me wrong, but it's never been problematic for me.
Okay.
You know, when I got into drug court, I didn't drink for quite some time.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to trade one for the other.
Right.
I'd never had a problem with alcohol, but then again, I'd never had anything taken my knees before anyway.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure I was solid, you know. So for me, I've told myself I'll never take another opiate.
How long did it take you, like, after drug court to finally say, okay, I can, like, go have a beer with my buddies?
I wanted, it was almost a year.
Okay.
It was almost a year.
Yeah.
You know, because you weren't supposed to drink in drug court, even though that wasn't my drug
of course.
choice.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
you know, but I started
sobriety.
having a beer here and there. They can't prosecute me now.
Right.
But you know, I just wanted to make sure, you know, because it shook my confidence in myself. I'd always thought I could overcome anything.
Yeah.
You know,
I know.
I never thought I would run into something that could take me to my knees like that. You know, and so many of my friends that I'd had for many years, just, they were shocked. Like, I can't believe that happened. And I couldn't believe that happened, you know? And so for me, it's been, it'll be 13 years in October. To this day, I still won't take an opiate. I mean, could I take 2 Norcos and be okay? Maybe. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to roll this. It's not worth. If there's a 2% chance I could lose the life I have, no way. Yeah. No way. I won't take that risk. And I've had persistent back injuries and everything else that I'm sure.
You work out a lot.
I work out a lot,
Yeah,
and I'm sure there's times, particularly when my back gets a little hinky on me, or a lot hinky as the case may be. It'd be sore for 3 weeks. I can barely walk sometimes. I'm sure a Norco or 2 would help.
Yeah.
I won't do it. Like I said, that's my personal thing. There may be some other people out there in recovery that, and that's cool.
Whatever works for you,
works for you.
Yeah, whatever works for you.
For me, I made that decision a long time ago that I would never take another opiate because it shook me so bad that I'd had something just literally take me off at the knees.
So looking back on it, would you say that the opiate addiction was caused by the injury or by your divorce?
I would say, so the injury was what caused me to start using them more.
An excuse to use them.
When you're in recovery, which is different from abstinence, you can abstain, that's great, but you've got to find out why you did that. If you don't find out the why, you're destined to repeat it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, and what I found in my recovery is because I lost everything. And I had a very hard time dealing with that. I had such high expectations for myself that when I lost everything, I checked out. I broke. And so that was my way of numbing myself. I'm just, instead of dealing with this and fighting back against it, I'd worked so hard, from the time I was 17, doing cars on the weekends and, out of the back of my Volkswagen Bug, to have lost everything that I lost, it was easier for me just to throw down some pills.
Forget all about it.
And as I said earlier, that doesn't work so well.
Yeah. For sure.
That obviously makes it infinitely worse, and it sets you back, and it took me years to recover because those were very formative wealth-building years.
If you could go back and give yourself like one piece of advice, just one piece of advice, what do you think you'd tell yourself?
The obvious answer would be don't take an opiate, right?
Yeah.
But that made me who I am. I would, one piece of advice, just if I gave myself to keep fighting, don't quit. I've said before, I would never want to relive that period of my life, but it made me the man I am.
Yeah.
And I can't regret that. I would never want to go through that again. It was horrible.
You have to embrace
but you have to embrace
experience.
it, and you have to embrace everything that entailed. Yeah. And it gave me a different outlook than I had before, and it made me the man I am today, for better or worse. So I don't regret that time, but I sure as hell wouldn't want to repeat it.
Yeah, same. I agree.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be a tough portion.
Yeah. I'll do my best.
Me too. Why don't you tell us how it all started, how you met her, how you fell in love with her, what was she like, who was she?
So Megan and I met in April of 13. I want to say it was April of 14. And I was at the tail end of drug court. So, I got out of jail the first part of 13, and then it went into 14. And it was the latter part of it where things kind of let up a little bit. Like, you haven't screwed up for 12 months, so now we're going to back off a little bit. You don't have to drug test 3 times a week. It's random every other week. They let up a little bit because you've proven So
build some
that's when I
trust.
met Megan, and I didn't really feel I was much in a position to be dating anybody. I didn't have a whole heck of a lot, and coincidentally, she worked for the district attorney's office, which had just got done prosecuting
And she's
me.
freaking smoking hot too.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah, so I meet her, and I'm like, well, I got to tell her, I got to tell her where I'm at in life and what I'm going through, So we went out, and I had a drink or two at that point to calm my nerves, and I just kind of launched into it, and she sat and listened, and I kind of went through my addiction and everything, and told her where I was at, and when I got, and it was, I was stumbling a little bit. I didn't know what she was going to say. And she looked at me, she goes, I know, I read your file.
of course you did.
Of course you did. Great.
You work at the district attorney's office.
And I said, oh, so I'm sure it doesn't read very well.
Yeah.
And
Their story is probably just slightly different from mine.
Those police reports don't portray you in a positive
not
light
always.
whatsoever. I'm like, oh, fantastic. But she goes, I'm still here. She said, the man I read about and the man I'm talking to aren't the same. And so that was, the first time that I saw the non-judgmental aspect
Yeah.
of her. And so, the relationship progressed fairly quickly. We got along great, had a lot in common, and it was my first real relationship since my marriage ended in 2004, 5, and so it was new to me too, dating, and so things went really well. We got engaged in April of 17, 3 years after we met, and then unfortunately she was diagnosed with breast cancer a few months after that, and I'd never dealt with anything like that. She was only 40 years old. And so my first thought is, okay, well, let's get after it, let's beat it,
Yeah.
But I do remember thinking when we walked out of the hospital that day, okay, well, whatever problems we thought we had, now we got a problem, but again, breast cancer is it's not uncommon, unfortunately,
It's
right?
It's terrible, right?
And she was initially diagnosed with a stage 2. Caught it fairly early, and it was scary. I still remember the look on her face when they told her. She was terrified. And so as a guy, we want to fix it, right? I want to fix things. I want to protect, and obviously that isn't anything I can fix. And so the only thing I can do is support. How do I support as best I can here? Because I can't fix it.
How do I support it the way she needs me, not
Right.
the way I want to?
The way I want to. What's best for her here? And again, I'm dealing with a situation I never dealt with before. And so she had immediate surgery,
Oh, wow.
a double mastectomy, and they did an immediate rebuild. And when they pulled the lymph nodes, the number of lymph nodes upgraded her to a stage 3. And so we went into immediate chemo. I went to every chemo appointment with her. The beeping of those machines is something I will not ever forget. We knew she was going to lose her hair. And, I just, gosh, man, you just try to support as best you can, and we decided, when that time has come, I would shave her head, and she never even had short hair. She always had long blonde hair. And, she didn't much talk about it, but I know it hit her self-esteem. It's hard, and lose your eyebrows and everything else. And, I tried to make light of it when I could. I said, well, I'll just draw eyebrows on you, and if you're in a good mood, I'll put them happy. If you're like angry or you're
a dick.
like quizzical, like one up, one down, So she went through the chemo, and I was still thinking, okay, it was hard. Certainly it was hard, chemo and radiation, but she was a trooper. She did the chemo, and she went right back to work. With the radiation, she would literally go to radiation 5 days a week and drive to work. And they cleared her, and then 8 months later, her hip started hurting, and she went to the doctor, and they said it was hip dysplasia. I thought just dogs got hip dysplasia, but she kept hammering on him. She wanted an MRI. She kept pushing him and pushing him, and she finally got the MRI, and it was back, and it was in multiple places throughout her hips. And so now, I learned a lot more about this than I ever cared to, obviously. So now it's called what we call metastasizing, and it is chemically it's still the same cancer, still the same breast cancer. It's just in different parts of the body. And they wanted to do chemo again, and she told them no. She had said before she would never do chemo again because they couldn't cure it. They said they could slow it down, but they couldn't cure it. And then it started to spread, and was starting to hit different areas of the body. And we looked into different options, and ultimately,
I remember you looking in other countries.
yeah, we ended up going to Mexico twice. The first time didn't take so well. It's an immunotherapy type thing, and then we found a fantastic oncologist by the name of Dr. Williams, Dr. Jason Williams, who's doing some very cutting edge things. And we had a Zoom with him, and he looked at her X-rays and everything, and he said, I think I can help. Obviously, I can't guarantee anything, but he does direct injecting of the tumors and then immunotherapy in the body as well. And it was terribly expensive. We drained both of our accounts. We had fundraisers, and I will say that I saw a beautiful side of people, a side of people I would have never seen. I always say there's a silver lining somewhere. You just got to find it. And that was hard to find a silver lining, but that was it. People were amazing, amazing. I saw just the generosity and the caring and love of people.
I remember that.
Was amazing. And I felt blessed to see that, but for that horrible situation, I wouldn't have seen that, And so anyhow, we went down to Mexico, and he made some pretty good headway. But ultimately, it came back. And at this point now, we're towards the end of 2019. She was still trying to work, but her energy was sapping fairly quickly. And then it got to her liver. And that was a huge problem. She was taking all kinds of liver cleansers and everything to try to detox her body. And it just wouldn't stop. It just wouldn't stop. We tried everything, and that thing just wouldn't quit, and there's a measure for your liver called your bilirubin count. And in a healthy person, it's, I believe, around a 1. It rarely gets over a 1. And hers was like a 6, 7. And she'd take all this liver detox stuff, and it'd get down to a 5, and then it'd go back up. And I remember it hit like 9. And then at one point she got some testing done, and she called me into the room, and it was at a 22, which means the liver is shutting down. And we had a doctor's appointment the next day. Just happened to have one, and I remember asking the doctor, what can we expect? And I was meaning like physically, like how is she going to feel? What is this going to do to her? And he said 2 weeks. I said 2 weeks what?
It's not what I was.
That's
not what I asked. It's not what I meant.
He said she has 2 weeks. It was like 12 days. And when it went quick, And it was hard. That was hard. She fought so damn hard, man. She fought so hard, and I look back at that, and I try to be grateful, that I was there for that. That was going to happen whether I was around or not. Clearly, God put me there for a reason. And whether it was because of my addiction and recovery that I was better suited to handle that, I don't know. She kept apologizing that she was putting me through that. And I told her, and I meant it. If I had known what was going to happen the day we met, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing. I wish this hadn't happened. But we did everything we could. And was my honor, to be by her side for that.
Yeah, most certainly was.
So, my friends, rallied around me. As I've said, I've always been super blessed to have some amazing friends. And
that was right during COVID, like
it was
when
during COVID. Everything shut down. And that was tough, because I had a plan. I knew this was coming, right? So, okay, well, I'm going to spend time with friends, and I'm going to hit the gym really hard, and maybe I'll take a little drive and clear my head, and that was my plan. And then the whole world shut down. And I remember thinking, well,
oh shit!
This wasn't part of my plan. The first forced economic shutdown in the history of our nation. So that was a hard time. But again, my friends were amazing.
Yeah.
And they got me through. And I think they also wanted to make sure I wasn't going to slip, because that's a typical addict response, right? To numb yourself.
Absolutely.
Instead of dealing with it, And before Megan passed, I had walked in the bathroom one time. She was dumping a bottle of pills in the toilet, and I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I don't want these around when I'm gone. I don't want to be the cause of anything." And I said, "I would never disrespect your memory like that." I said, "But that's fine. You can dump them if that makes you feel
Kind of
better."
woman she was.
Yeah. So, I try to take what I can from such as painful as that was, that it has given me an appreciation and a gratefulness for life and health in general, of just realizing that life can change with a diagnosis. I could wake up tomorrow with my stomach hurting and go and be told I have stage 4 cancer in my stomach.
Can change with someone running a red light.
Running a red light. You don't know, And, especially now, living at the beach, and I've always loved the ocean, and I have appreciation and gratefulness every day. I'm more conscious of it some days than others, don't get me wrong, but, a couple weeks before Megan passed, we went down to the beach because we used to spend a lot of time at the beach, and we'd gone down to Newport, and as we crested Superior Avenue, you can see the ocean, and I could see her out of the corner of my eye. She was crying, and I looked at her. I said, "You okay?" She was just the last time I'll ever see the ocean. So every day I see that ocean, I remember that she didn't have that chance, and I damn well better appreciate it, because I was given the gift of that day that she wasn't. And that's what I try to take from that. Sadness, of course.
Yeah.
But I try to take appreciation and gratitude that I would not have had but for that situation, And so I would say you try to take positive from a journey no one would want to take, right? No one would choose that path. But if I don't take something positive from it, now it's a double whammy, Now she's gone, and what am I going to operate? Bitter?
And it's all for nothing.
All for nothing. So I do my darndest, to be very conscious appreciation, conscious joy. And that's in big part because I watched somebody that would have given anything to have another year, another 2 years, another day. So if we don't appreciate that, then I think we're missing out.
Yeah.
Every day you open your eyes, every day you get up, that's a blessing. That's a gift.
Oh yeah.
And especially as we get older, that could be taken in a heartbeat. I've had a lot of friends pass away.
Yeah.
And, I don't operate in just a constant state of joy, joyfulness and appreciation and gratefulness, but I do try to be very conscious of it, and realize that it's not, it's very common to say tomorrow's never promised. Right?
But nothing's promised.
But nothing's promised.
And we don't deserve anything.
No.
We don't deserve
and so
anything.
I just, I feel just incredibly blessed to live where I do, and, that I'm in a wonderful relationship now, and I'm grateful and blessed to have her, and I I thank God that I have what I have. You know, try to be appreciative of it.
You're a blessed man, but you've earned it.
Yeah, I just done my best.
Yeah. I mean, that's all we can do, man. It's, there's a million books on how to live life, but I don't think any of them lived our life.
No, they haven't. No, they haven't. It can be a challenge, and it's what you make of it. It's your perspective. You know, if you want to operate bitter and upset and angry, you can.
That's what you'll get back.
That's what you get back. You know, and like I said, it's not like I go through every day, doing cartwheels and throwing confetti. Life is tough, man. It is, but trying to maintain the right perspective and having appreciation and gratefulness and being conscious joy. Where I sit on the beach and I appreciate those waves I'm getting to see, that I'm blessed to be able to see, because others don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's why we work so hard, man. And
it is.
Be able to see those views and take in those sights and remember those memories. And
yep. That's exactly it.
Whew. Yeah. Sorry about that. It's always tough for me when I think about that. I'm sure it is for you too.
It is. It is.
So, and we touched on it a little bit, but in what ways did your past experience shape your detailing business? I mean, what really was it about detailing that? Was it just because it was easy and it came natural to you and it was cheap to get into, or did you really enjoy it?
It was easy and I knew it. Are you talking about after?
Yeah, you could have went back to owning a limo company or doing anything else.
It was easy, for me to get back into, and I honestly wasn't even entirely sure that's what I wanted to do, as a career again. Right. I'd done fairly well with it, prior to losing everything. And I didn't really think I would reach the numbers that we did previously. It so happens we more than doubled them. But I didn't think I would even get back there. And so I thought I'll do this for now because it can generate me some income. But I didn't know that I was going to continue doing it, But as it grew, gosh darn it, I like a challenge.
Yeah.
And so, and I enjoy talking to my customers. I have a customer I'm supposed to have tea or coffee with next week. She's been a customer for 30 years.
Nice.
And to me, that's what it's all about, is those relationships. And I've met some amazing people through my business. And as long as I've done it, I've made some amazing friendships through my business. And that's the value of it to me.
Same here.
Is certainly turning out good quality work and being ethical and moral and all that. But my initial thing was just I knew it could generate me some income, but I was going to kind of keep my eyes open. But as it grew, the challenge came in, and then when I decided, when I moved out of the area, now can I scale it so that I don't have to be there on a daily basis?
Right.
Which if you'd asked me, I'd always said, if you want to be an absentee owner, you shouldn't be in a service-based business. A service-based business, the owner needs to be there on a daily basis, is what I would tell you. I mean, I have an unusual situation. My service manager is fantastic, and I'm still heavily involved in the business. I do sales daily and all that good stuff. And then I'm still back there, a couple days a week or whatever. But, I always joke, so you want an absentee owner business, buy a laundromat. That's an absentee owner business.
Yeah.
But again, I enjoy the challenge. And so, I'm fortunate I've been able to scale it and set it up in such a way that, I can live down in Hermosa and then come back to Redlands and still catch up on, coffee with a friend or dinner with a friend and still catch up on my relationships there. Cause I lived there for 40 years,
So I feel like what you're saying is you're kind of leading into it's important to build a good team.
It's huge.
How do you select teammates and teams?
The guys that have been with me for years now. And my service manager, I think, started with me 3 or 4 years ago. And he didn't know a darn thing about detailing. His brother had worked for me and was moving on of state or something. And so he came and started with me. He was young, 19. He didn't know a darn thing about detailing. But he started, and, to me, especially when someone starts, to answer your question, is consistency. Can they be on time? Can they learn? They have common sense. You would think those are all easy things, but as you're well aware, not so much. And so the crew members I have, my team, all have those qualities, you know. And right now we have 3 full-time, 1 part-time. You know, I've gone as high as 5. You know, back in the day, I took over 5 dealerships, had 24 employees at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, that's not for me.
that's not fun. So we're at a very comfortable spot right now.
Good.
You know, we stay very busy. The revenue's good. You know, you still got to keep an eye on costs and so forth. But you know, that's just business. Yeah. But to answer your question, it's that consistency. Can they be responsible? Do they have common sense? Can they learn? Can they take direction? You know, and when we have our meetings, I tell them, what can I do better? What do you need from me that perhaps I'm not giving you? Mm-hmm. You know, I'm far from perfect.
What are some of the answers you've gotten?
Make sure, you know, so we'll develop, you know, different ways to manage inventory because we're running out of stuff.
Okay.
You know, a lot of our stuff is ordered online. So it's not like we can run down to AutoZone and pick up Angel Wax Resurrection.
Right, for sure.
So, you know, we also have inventory discussions, customer service follow-ups, you know, maybe any issues we've had that week, you know, how did we resolve those? What can we do better?
Nice.
You know, that type of thing.
Yeah.
You know, Andrew, my service manager, had asked, you know, when I was back in town if I could spend more hours actually at the shop physically, just so he felt like he had a little bit of backup. So I started doing that as well because I want to support him.
Yeah.
You know, those guys are the reason I'm able not to have to be there every single day.
The more you support them, the
yeah.
more they're
So
gonna
whatever they
successful.
need from me,
Yeah.
you know, then I will certainly try to give them. So, yeah, it's just, you know, it's very simple things, you know. And Andrew, you know, really came into his own with customer service. He's a fantastic customer service representative, presents very well. The customers really enjoy him, and you know, but for that, I would need to be there daily.
Yeah.
You know, so I try to make sure that, you know, he and everyone is taken care of.
For sure.
You know, it's a team effort. You know, one doesn't function without the other.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's how I've done that.
Well, if you could give any advice to someone, maybe not yourself, but someone else who is in recovery and dealing with a shit ton of adversity from
Right.
every direction,
Right.
what would you give them?
Surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with people that are where you want to be or are going where you want to be. So many of the people I saw in drug court grew up with it. They went back to neighborhoods where it was prevalent. A lot of them, their parents introduced them to it. Oh my gosh. So I had an advantage, so to speak, in that I had a group of friends that didn't use drugs and that would hold me accountable. You know, so I went, now, it made it easier, quote unquote, for me than say someone that grew up in a neighborhood and on all their friends still use drugs. So I had a little bit of advantage in that regard. So if someone does not have that advantage, they've got to somehow remove themselves from that situation. It is going to be near impossible to stay clean if you're surrounded by it constantly. Those people don't care about your well-being. They want you to be part of their little twisted circle that's going nowhere, right? It's like in jail. Half those guys in jail, 3/4 of them, it's not a question if they're coming back to jail. It's just when. Hey, when are you going to be back? We'll see you again. You know, you going to CDC or West Valley next time? Yeah. It's just because it becomes a mentality, you know. So, you know, if you don't have that group of friends that surround you, then you got to remove yourself from that situation, whatever it takes, you know, whether it's going to a church or AA meetings or whatever, you know, surround yourself with people that are interested in your success and have a vested interest in holding you accountable. You know, when I got clean, October 24th, 2012 is my clean date. I lost my very best friend that following November. He died suddenly. And he was the guy I talked to every day. He was even through my addiction. You know, he knew what was going on with me, but we talked every day, and I'd known him for 20 years. And he wasn't feeling well one day. He went to the hospital. I was supposed to pick him up in the morning. He went into a coma and he died. And my friends just blew my phone up, came by the shop. They wanted to make sure, because I was fresh. You know, I was less than just over a year clean. They wanted to make sure that, you know, his name was Todd. They wanted to make sure that Todd's passing wasn't going to send me sideways. You know, that's the kind of people you need to surround you. So I had to give one piece of advice, and I always say I didn't do it on my own, right? It's because I had, you know, my mother was always been terribly supportive of me. You know, my friends, you know, all of them, you know, surrounded me and made sure that I was good through that period, because it's very easy to falter there. Because like I said, the whole, you know, for me, it was numbing myself, and that's very common for a lot of people. You know, you suffer a loss, you know, whether it's financial or a parent or a child, you know, some type of loss where it's just easier to numb yourself, you know, so.
Or isolate yourself.
Or isolate yourself, you know, and you know, a lot of drug use is isolating, you know. You know, it's very easy to sit around and smoke heroin all by yourself, right? You know, and you don't care to socialize. You know, I didn't go out for years. You know, I stopped working out. I stopped living. You know, I felt like I was an observer. I was outside looking in. You know, I remember there's an event called the Redlands Bike Classic, huge event. You know, professional cyclists come in from all over the world, and it takes through all downtown and goes. But it was going by my house at the time when I was in my addiction, and I remember kind of walking out there and watching everybody and thinking, these people are actually living life. I'm not living life. Yeah. I'm just existing. Yeah, it made me feel like a piece of crap, and not enough to change at that time.
Not a good feeling.
You know, but I realized at that time, you know, there's a big difference between living life and just existing. And you want to surround yourself with people who want to live life.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, they want to push you to be the best person you can be, that hold you accountable, you know, that force you to grow. You know, because if you're surrounding yourself with people that are still using, yeah, it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well. I always say it's up in two ways, right? Dead or in jail.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. I'll choose neither.
Me either. I'll take what I got every day,
Well,
and then some.
man, thank you so much for opening up and sharing some of the
Yeah, I don't.
hard moments.
I haven't done that.
Yeah.
Not to that extent.
Well, you did a really great job, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you taking the time to have me.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are going to be able to hear this and recognize that the strength and resilience comes from the people that we surround ourselves with and the energy we surround ourselves with. And it's up to us to choose
Very much so.
where we fit in.
You know, like when you and I talked, you know, if my experience, and like I said, I wouldn't choose to have done it, but it is what it is. It happened. And so if you know, someone can change or is inspired or it helps them in any capacity, and it's worth every minute.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Well, what days are you in the shop in Redlands so we can just...
Tuesday, Wednesday.
Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah.
Elite Detailing and Ceramic Coating in Redlands, California. Stop in
Yes,
there
sir.
and see Neal and tell him how great of a job he's done with life and business and
I
this
appreciate that.
podcast.
Thank you, brother.
So, whew.
Awesome.
Okay, guys. That was episode 4 of Attention to Details with Neil Glines. Please like and subscribe for more, and we'll see you on the next one.